I am so happy to be joined on this stage today by two amazing CHROs who are doing work that I think we all can really relate to. So with me, I have Betty Larson, who's the CHRO of Merck, and Laura Fuentes, who's the CHRO of Hilton. And maybe just to take a poll in the audience, because our conversation today is about leading through change, building agility, adaptability, and trust in a time of continuous transformation. Who in this room is leading some sort of change or transformation effort within the past 18 months? I think the entire audience had their hands go up. It is the thing that we are constantly faced with, which was taking a leadership position in a moment of change, in a moment of transformation, and a company that is going through some sort of reorganization. And you, as the head of HR, are helping to try to bring order to sometimes the chaos that can exist in those moments. And I think we're going to have a great opportunity to learn from two leaders who have really helped drive company through those transformational moments and the lessons that be learned and taken away from those times. And I think, maybe Betty, I'll start with you, because we think about this moment of change and transformation, and one of the things that becomes difficult in those situations is just really how do you build trust? Particularly when it feels like we're constantly in this change moment. And yet, we also know that trust is the ability and it's the key that enables us to really help people see through the other side of the initiatives that we're leading. Bring us inside the war room at Merck, the things that you guys have going on, and how you've really been able to continue to hold trust in those moments of change.
Yeah. By the way, don't you love events in New York City? Because you can always count on honking or ambulances or something behind us, so it just breaks the ice. We're still relatively new in our transformation, so I think, knock on wood, we feel pretty good about how we've been able to maintain trust so far. But this is an issue that's top of mind for us. I was mentioning to Kevin earlier, I'm a fangirl of Frances Fry and Anne Morris, and they have a great book that talks about you have to move fast and fix things, but you have to invest equal amounts of energy in building, rebuilding, and maintaining trust. And I think that the important thing that we do is that we just are realistic about the fact that we will break trust for some people at some point in the transformation, and we just have to get back out there. So I think the advice is you just have to keep showing up. Transparency is everything in building, maintaining, and rebuilding trust, and being able to get there and show up, answer the tough questions, say you don't know, I think is probably the number one thing. So communication and visibility and presence.
Yeah, that's such great advice of just getting back in there and staying in the game. And Laura, I can think about the work that you're doing at Hilton and the many seasons that you've been through, from leading through the pandemic, through taking frontline workers, through all sorts of change and transformation. How is that always evolving, and what's one moment of sort of trust building that stands out for you?
Yeah, happy to go there, and thanks, by the way, for having us. It's really great to be here with everyone. I've been at Hilton for 12 years, and it's been one change after another. So we were PE-owned, went public, we spun off our real estate business, COVID hit, we've had recovery, all the things, growth in the midst of all that. But yeah, one particular example that comes to mind when I think about trust and maintaining trust in difficult times. And of course, like a good little nerdy student, last night I was in ChatGPT, and I'm like, give me the best definition of trust. And it actually stuck with me, because trust really goes back to this belief that someone's got your back, especially when you're vulnerable. And so I was thinking of the conversation we're going to have today, and one example that really comes to mind is during COVID for us. So as you all lived through, right, COVID really brought travel to a standstill. And when you think of our business, hotels and hospitality, once we open a property, it never closes. It's open all night long, it's open through the holidays. And so for the first time in our history, we had to suspend operations and close our hotels. And as devastating as that was for our business, because our revenue stream sort of went to zero overnight, it was also really hard from our people perspective. And we had to furlough individuals, we had to lay off our team members. That is heartbreaking, really difficult work to do, where you think, this is where we're going to lose our people. And we had been on a really nice run up until that time. In fact, we had just celebrated being named #1 best place to work by Fortune and Great Place to Work, like January of 2020. So as we did that, made those tough decisions, we made a few core calls that I think were really differentiated and aligned to our values. One was, we could have laid off our entire recruiting team, because obviously we were not going to be hiring anytime soon. And we made the differential decision to say we're going to keep our recruiters, we're going to build a platform, partner across other industries, and showcase jobs and companies that are hiring, and reach out, and I probably reach out to folks in this room to see if our team members, since they had already had background checks and were trained, could have preferential pathways to those jobs. At our peak, we listed over 1 million jobs and opportunities for volunteering, for work. And so as we were laying off our team members, they were posting on LinkedIn how cared for they felt by us. And so that was a huge moment that I think signaled to those remaining and those leaving, like, when we're back on our feet, you're welcome back. Like, here's how we're going to take care of you in the interim. We also volunteered, donated 1 million room nights to first responders and doctors in partnership with Amex, because we knew our hotels were empty and people were sleeping in cars. So these are moments not only when we take care of people when they're vulnerable, but I also think it's important to build trust when you're vulnerable. There's a quote that says, crisis doesn't build character, it reveals it. And so I thought that was really true for us, and we wanted to show our true colors, and I think that helped build trust in the long term.
Those examples are so fantastic, and I mean, I want to go there with what you just described about vulnerability, because research from even BetterUp in our lab shows that when you are expressing vulnerability, you're 45% more likely to increase trust, and yet we're all human, and sometimes in these moments of crisis, it's the exact time. You may have the exact opposite response of wanting to show that you're in control, show that you have all the answers, express that there's nothing to see here, everything's fine, when really it may not be. So how do you challenge and coach and help leaders really show that sense of vulnerability and build those trust-building habits, even in moments of crisis? And maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean,
Betty.
look, I think the number one thing that I find I coach leaders around, in whether it be crisis or some sort of transformation, is you have to resist the urge to want to tell people what they want to hear. You have to be willing to tell people what they need to hear. And sometimes that's, I don't know. And sometimes that I can't say right now. But again, you have, like I said before, you have to keep showing up. And so, I'm a big believer that as you go through transformation, you have to tap into humanity, both your own and then allowing people to have a very human reaction to their experience and how they're experiencing change. So a lot of times with leaders, you have to show up. You have to be the one that's willing to hear the frustrations. You often tell them, or we tell them, you're not going to convince people to get on board. You're not going to convince them to think or feel differently in that discussion. That's not your job. Your job is to listen. It's to be empathetic. It's to understand. And it's to be confident in the path that we've put forward. And so I think that it is really about showing up, being yourself. We're not asking leaders. We often, Jolen, so when we go through a large transformation, we treat different segments of the population differently, right? Well, I'm sure we'll talk about how we engage top leaders. But we also often have to engage people leaders to walk them through this and say, this is what we're asking you to do. We know you might be frustrated or have questions or need context too. This is a safe space. Tell us what you need so we can support you, and know that we're not asking you to go out and convince your employees of this. We're just asking you to be there for them and allow them the grace to have a human reaction. And so I think it's just coaching along those lines.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I love your example of treating different segments differently, giving permission to ask questions, really being intentional about how you're messaging during those transformational moments. We've talked a lot about how we're in this constant state of change, and one of the things that's become very apparent is that we need agility in our workforce. And that's not just about speed, it's about evolving with intention. Again, yet not easy. So Laura, maybe share with us, how have you designed agility into Hilton's culture, especially when you have such a global, dispersed workforce doing so many different things? How do you really embed that in who you are?
Yeah, and plus one to everything Betty just said, but we have 500,000 people working under Hilton flags, 25 brands, 120 countries, and growing, right? So for us, the key is to have freedom within a framework, right? I mean, to put it simply. So the framework is our purpose, our values, our key strategic priorities. Like, those things are globally consistent and transcend our regions, our jobs, our brands, et cetera. And it is how we look to connect our entire ecosystem. Within our jobs, hotels, properties, we want our team members to feel empowered, right? Because you can't send an email back to corporate when a guest is complaining about a situation at a property, right? We want the people on the ground to feel that they are empowered, that they are listening, that they can make it right. And so we actually do a lot of work at every stage of the talent lifecycle to make sure that they have that mindset. So I'll give you a few examples. When we're out there recruiting, our consumer-facing brand is Hilton for the stay. And so we intentionally connected our recruiting campaign, every job makes a stay, so that every single person we hire feels like, I am contributing to this mission. We then train people. We have Make It Right trainings. We push out to the entire organization to show them, like, and it's back to what you're saying. It's hear a guest out, empathize, acknowledge their concern, respond, like treat them like a human, right? Because we're not going to be able to predict every single solitary situation that you're going to face. And then we recognize, we celebrate, we elevate those stories. We do a lot of storytelling around this so that we show people, like, there are some frameworks, there are some principles, but you have the power to be that hospitality hero for our guests. We're going to celebrate those who do it really well and embed it at every step of their experience with us. And a lot of that is also for leaders, right, to do a lot of storytelling and the context sharing. So, around transparency, too, I always like to say, look, leaders have to share the context, give space for response. Don't spread chaos, right? So be thoughtful, be measured. I always try to prevent against transparency trauma, because especially in these days, right? Like you could come in with a head on fire saying like, oh my God, here are all the things I just heard from the top or from investors or whatever. And we have to be able to contextualize that, to package it up, to filter it appropriately, and drive, from that truth, the action that you want, right? And I always like to tell my team, like, we're not going to get certainty. We can have clarity. Clarity on a lot of the things that bind us, clarity on the things that guide us, and clarity in our collective belief in one another and the things that we are capable of.
So I think everything you said is so important, and yet it gets back to leadership principles. You talked a lot about that. And Betty, I'm curious, you're in an organization where leaders might be used to more stability and structure, and yet you're in the middle of this transformation and you equally need them to be more adaptive, bringing those agility frameworks to bear. How have you started to build that culture at Merck?
Yeah, so it's an interesting challenge at Merck. So as a life sciences company that's been in existence for more than 100 years, and we take what we do pretty seriously. We're very heavily regulated, and we have amazing talent in the organization that are pride themselves on their professional expertise. We have a perfection bias in the company. And so that's something that when you have an organization that has a perfection bias, it certainly works against agility, experimentation, failing fast, all the things. Now, the good news is we're also a scientific organization, so the scientific method is all about proving null hypotheses and failing fast, and so we try to tap into that. But this can be hard, right? And so I think I love the idea of a freedom in the framework, because we talk about the areas in which we do want to be agile, where we can kind of empower decision-making deeper in the organization, and we're just very realistic about, hey, these things are sacrosanct. Right? We have one product that has $30 billion in revenue. Right? Very few people can make changes to anything relative to how that product is marketed, the scientific data that gets. So there's very clear understanding of where there's not the opportunity for experimentation or freedom. But I think chipping away at this perfection bias has been hard. We are incredibly purpose-driven. So the people that come to the organization have family members that have either had cancer and they're using one of our drugs, or maybe another therapeutic area. So people are there to make a meaningful difference on others. So what we tap into is our purpose. And so our CEO often talks about patients are waiting and patients can't wait. So where we can move faster, we do need to move faster. And so I guess the leadership principles that we tap into is, first of all, anchor everything in our purpose, right? We talk to leaders about perfect when necessary. So make sure that you're not holding a standard of perfection for things that don't have to be perfect. When is good enough, good enough? And then we try to role model experimentation or vulnerability, because we're constantly working against that perfection bias so that we can introduce more agility. So I don't necessarily know if they're textbook leadership behaviors. We have our leadership model that we train against, but when we gather these leaders together, especially as we're going through change, we try to demonstrate it's okay to not have all the answers. We don't need to be perfect here, et cetera.
Yeah, hearing from both of you how you tap into the core of who you are as companies, the guests that you care for, the patients that you help cure, and how that becomes the North Star to the change that you're leading, I think is really powerful and helpful to our audience. I cannot help, and I would say Kevin made me ask, how does AI play? What role does it play in everything that we've sort of just been discussing? Maybe just one or two thoughts from our audience as we think about our time left here of just how you're using that moment to embed some of this change and transformation and the principles that you're applying.
I would make an observation that you have two CHROs of fairly large companies, and we both admitted that we went to ChatGPT to ask questions around adaptive leadership. So having the humility to say, I don't have all the answers, and where can we use AI? I mean, we definitely have, I think, successfully introduced AI. I mean, think about the potential for AI in drug discovery. Right? There are things where once you're onto a potential solution, you have to do a number of experiments to try to prove or disprove something's going to work, what's the right formulation, et cetera. So the more we can introduce AI into that process, and surprisingly, you don't have people who are afraid of it because they themselves also want to get through the 100 permutations to get a product to a patient faster. I think there's an area where we're using AI. I think we're exploring AI agents that we can use to help managers do their jobs, to help get answers to employees faster so that they have 24/7 accessibility. So we have guardrails around where we can use it because our data is everything to us, but we're not afraid to experiment as well. And again, I think it's making sure we provide tools to people and provide case studies and role model examples, but then have governance around it as well.
Yeah, Laura, what about you?
Yeah, for us, I mean, I think there's three core buckets that we're really looking at from an AI perspective. One is, of course, like how can we do more things at scale, continue to grow, the efficiency play, all those things, sort of back of house from HR to finance to marketing. There's the guest experience. How can we deliver a better guest experience, more personalized, anticipate our guests' needs, solve problems more quickly and readily, communicate better between hotels and corporate. And then there's sort of the future of e-commerce, the future of travel, of itinerary planning, and where do we want to play there? So we have, sort of work against all of those pillars. I will say from a leadership perspective, I think this is probably the space where I have gone the fastest in my career from annoyed to all in. Like literally I can remember, a few months ago, my husband works in tech and he kept pushing these like AI podcasts. And I was like, oh my God, like stop with this. And then over the course of a weekend, I was like, can you play that again? Like, can we listen to that and give me a little tutorial? And so having the vulnerability too, like I think we have to move along the spectrum quickly for our workforces and go from, what I call the 5 stages of grief with AI, right? Which is I'm fearful, I'm annoyed, to full like curiosity, fluency, vulnerability, ambition, right? And like moving along and recognizing everyone's not going to move at the same speed. But as leaders, we have such an opportunity to be AI vulnerable. I don't know what I'm talking about. AI open. Like we were talking backstage, about, I met a team member, that I'd never laid eyes on before, who was just super curious, had taken the training, built some agents, and I'm like, can I have a meeting with this guy? And like, he's going to be my reverse mentor, just to like show me what's possible. Like new career pathways are possible. And then, asking all the questions. I mean, if there's something cool about this moment is that it really has democratized a beginner's eye. We're all learning at the same time. And that's really powerful, right? So there are going to be, I think winners and losers and people learning more quickly than others. So it is a moment where it's like, this is where agility, learning, curiosity, judgment, sense-making, all these things are going to be more important than ever. And if you're leading a workforce, if you're a leader of a team, like it's a moment to role model all these things in really powerful and fun ways. So that's my personal sort of journey and still moving along it. But
I love that. You've both been so open, vulnerable, demonstrating transparency. If you had to leave our audience with one thing, one principle for leading through change long term, something you return to again and again, what would it be? Betty, I'll start with you.
I think it's authentically show up.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say be a human, like be a great listener. This is a moment to listen and like create space to do that listening. So I tell myself always to be like the chief listening officer too for the org. Learn from others, be curious.
Love that. Love that. Thank you both for your time, for your sharing your stories and vulnerability.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.